Welcome to Military Analytics. The tension in the Crimean Peninsula, the most strategic center of the war between Ukraine and Russia, shows no sign of decreasing. Russia, which has not taken a step back since the first day it occupied Crimea, is also trying to develop its defense line day by day. Fear of losing Crimea has gripped Russia, while Ukrainian leader Zelensky has promised to take back all of the territory occupied by Russia. Moscow is trying to prepare comprehensive defenses, especially in the illegally annexed peninsula of Crimea, which is now one of the most important places in the war zone. Defense lines have rapidly risen before Ukraine's anticipated spring offensive. In just a few weeks, Russia established a mile-long defensive line near the town of Vytino on the west coast of Crimea. The future of Crimea remains a thorny issue. Russian President Vladimir Putin swore that he would never give up Crimea, but Ukraine remains determined. The Crimean Peninsula, one of the most important strategic points in the Black Sea, is preparing for Ukrainian attacks. The Ukrainian army has increased attacks and sabotage against targets in Crimea in line with its plan of attack on Ukraine. Crimea has formed a new offensive force with Western support at the Corps level, equipped with advanced Western-made weapons to support Ukrainian forces. Russia is stepping up its security measures in Crimea in anticipation of a major Ukrainian offensive expected in spring. Russian leader Vladimir Putin openly fears the invasion of Crimea, considering the possibility of Ukraine gradually reclaiming it through audacious attacks. Russian President Vladimir Putin is worried that Ukraine is keeping Crimea under fire. The Ukrainian military is already testing this strategy. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Incident Data Project, more than 70 suspected attacks targeting Russian positions in or near Crimea have been carried out by Ukrainian forces or their collaborators since August. Many of these attacks consist of airstrikes, including those with drones. It seems that some of them are the work of Ukrainian saboteurs. While Russia has prevented some attacks, others have been successful and, at times, with devastating results. The Ukrainian army continues its attacks on logistics centers that are important to Russian forces. Ukraine attacked the Russian Navy base in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula with an armed drone. In a statement by the Russian Ministry of Defense, it was confirmed that recently, at about 3:30 am, the Kiev forces attempted to attack the Black Sea Fleet's base in Sevastopol with 3 unmanned high-speed boats. Russian authorities then announced that in Crimea, the army had repelled the attack on Ukraine's main naval base and that a drone carrying explosives had crashed near Moscow. According to the details reflected in the Russian press, it was stated that the UAVs used in the attack were Ukrainian-made, with 22 airborne models carrying about 500 grams of C4 explosives. The Moscow-appointed head of Sevastopol, Mikhail Rostovtsev, stated that no damage was recorded in the area due to the attack and that all units were on alert. The attack was the latest in a series of attempted attacks on Sevastopol, the main naval base in Crimea, which Russia legally annexed in 2014. Russia accused Ukraine of carrying out an armed drone attack on the Russian naval base in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. While Ukrainian officials did not comment on the attacks after previous attacks on Sevastopol and other areas, Ukrainian officials have openly refrained from taking responsibility but stressed the country's right to hit any target in response to Russian aggression. On the other hand, observers believe that the most likely target of the counterattack will be the Russian-controlled parts of the southern Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. If the attack is successful, it will be possible for Ukraine to cut off the land corridor between Russia and Crimea. As is known, the Crimean Peninsula in the Black Sea is a key war target for Ukraine. These attacks could force Putin and his top military officials to reconsider their strategy and inflict more damage in other ways, such as through the wider use of air defense weapons. Although it is not easy to take back Crimea, Ukraine has the ability to do so. Ukrainian forces are ready to move towards the peninsula, and Russian military capabilities are severely frayed. Russia's remaining soldiers are exhausted and do not want to fight. Naval bases, air bases, and supply routes to Crimea have been damaged by the Ukrainian attacks. In short, in the face of a possible major attack by Ukraine in the coming days, Russia is not in a position to stand against the Ukrainian army, which is supported by the US and NATO allies. The permanent end of Russian aggression and the liberation of Crimea also set an important historical precedent for the whole world. Therefore, recapturing Crimea is vital to prevent future conflicts and avoid a return to a period of conquest. In addition, the Ukrainians can carry out much stronger attacks on other fronts based on this critical data. A local official in Russia announced that they found an armed drone covered with explosives in the forest area in the northeast of Moscow. Igor Sekin, the mayor of the Bogorodsky district, where it's claimed that the armed UAV is located, stated that it's not the first armed UAV to appear in the Moscow region. Sekin stated that in February, a similar armed UAV was found in the town of Kolomna, about 100 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Sekin conveyed the information that the May 9 celebrations, which are celebrated as Victory Day in Russia, were cancelled due to the discovered threat. On the other hand, recently, in just 24 hours on the Mariupol and other Donetsk front lines, the Ukrainian Air Force carried out 4 strikes targeting Russian manpower clusters. In addition, Ukrainian forces shot down 5 Russian drones of various types. Ukrainian rocket and artillery units struck 2 Russian checkpoints, a manpower cluster, an air defense system, an ammunition depot, and 2 artillery units. In response to the attacks, the Russian army is actively digging trenches and building staggered defenses around Mariupol. Petro Andriaschenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, said in a statement that the Russians are trying to fortify the area by digging trenches and building gradual defenses. Petro Andriaschenko also shared information that the Russians are constructing wooden shelters. The advisor to the mayor of Mariupol states that wood has been transported for the construction of these walls. The number of fortifications is increasing in all directions as the successful attacks by Ukrainian forces continue. Information has emerged that Slovenia has transferred 20 Valuk armored personnel carriers to Ukraine. The Ukrainian information publication reported that 20 Valuk armored personnel carriers were transferred from Slovenia to Ukraine, and all actions related to the transport of military equipment were carried out swiftly. According to the information received, the Valuk armored personnel carriers were delivered to a country on the border with Ukraine via C-17 transport plane. The capacity of this aircraft allows for the placement of 4 Volk armored personnel carriers on board. It is stated that the Volos armored personnel carriers can be used by the Ukrainian armed forces during the planned counterattack. Valuk armored personnel carriers are designed to transport infantry and protect personnel from anti-personnel mines and light weapons. There are 2 versions of this machine, usually a transport vehicle equipped with a 12.7mm squared machine gun or a 40mm squared automatic grenade launcher, and a special version with a mortar equipped with a 120mm squared mortar. In conclusion, although Russia is taking precautions and measures against Ukraine's imminent major attack, the Ukrainian army, strengthened by the support of the West and the USA, cannot be stopped at the moment. A flash statement came from the Kremlin. The Kremlin administration claimed that Ukraine targeted Russian leader Vladimir Putin and attempted to assassinate him. After these statements by the Kremlin, the tension between the 2 countries increased after the event that shocked the world. 2 separate statements came from Ukraine. Moscow has accused Kiev of attempting to attack the Kremlin, the residence of Russian President Putin, with a drone. Russian state news agency RIA Novosti claimed that 2 Ukrainian drones targeted the Kremlin. The alleged attack took place days before Victory Day, May 9th, when Russia commemorates the defeat of the Nazis in World War II. It was stated that with the timely activation of the air defense systems, the unmanned aerial vehicles were neutralized before they could attack the Kremlin. The Kremlin administration's statement that we reserve the right to respond raised tensions. The Kremlin press service described the alleged attack as a planned act of terrorism and an assassination of Putin. It was noted that Putin was not harmed due to the attempted attack. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated that there will be no change in Putin's work program after the assassination attempt. Dmitry Peskov said that Putin was not in the Kremlin palace at the time of the attack. Peskov added that the president continues his work at his residence in Novo-Ogaryovo, just outside of Moscow. It was reported that the parts that fell to the ground as a result of the shooting down of the unmanned aerial vehicles did not cause material damage. State Duma Deputy Mikhail Sheremay called for a retaliatory missile attack on President Zelensky's residence in Kiev. In addition, after the rise in tension, the attention turned to the statement to be made by Ukraine. Zelensky's press spokesperson Nikiforov stated that they had no information about the so-called attacks on the Kremlin. Hours after the incident, a statement came from the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. Speaking in Finland, Zelensky denied the allegations. The Kiev leader said they did not attack Putin or Moscow. Zelensky concluded his statement by saying that we have no weapons to spend on this, and we are fighting in our own country. The fact that the aircraft are drones with a range of 5 kilometers led to comments that the alleged attack attempt was made from within the city limits of Moscow. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin banned the use of drones inside the capital. On the other hand, Samuel Bendit, advisor to the Center of the New American Security, posted footage of the alleged attack on Twitter. Samuel Bendit stated that many details about the attack are still unclear. Referring to the footage of one of the drones, Bendit stated that it is not clear whether it was launched from within Ukraine or from Russian territory. He stated that the drone looks quite large. Bendit suggested that the drones could be Chinese-made Mojin 5, which Ukraine had previously used to strike Crimea, or Ukraine's new J-22 long-range unmanned aerial vehicle. According to him, this attack revealed that the Kremlin, the political heart of Russia, is not safe. But did Ukraine really try to kill Putin with a drone attack? There are excellent reasons to be skeptical of Russia's allegations of the attack. Indeed, the Kremlin may be trying to divert everyone's attention from the fact that Ukraine could hit Moscow wherever the attack comes from or whatever it targets. It is a great embarrassment to President Putin and his administration. Ukraine, for its part, denies any knowledge of the attack. In addition, we do not yet know the characteristics of the aircraft used in the attack. The video shows at least one drone exploding over the Kremlin. However, it is difficult to distinguish the details of the vehicle. Ukraine launched further missile attacks against Russian targets, but none of them were at this distance or with this blatant accuracy. However, the technology to have larger and longer range drones is not beyond Kiev's reach. Russia has the advantage of being able to recover and control the wreckage of any drone. Knowing the size of the vehicle also gave clues about how the vehicle escaped the Russian air defense systems on the way to Moscow. Given the electronic traffic on and near the target, the guidance system should be one of the key questions for Russian researchers. Russia will certainly want to thwart any further attack on Moscow. We don't know if this was an assassination attempt. We just know that the Russians want us to think that way. No matter who you ask, the assassination question arises during the war. International law tends to take the killing of foreign officials coldly, even in times of war. However, certain circumstances may justify an attack. Putin undoubtedly has direct authority over the military forces of the Russian Federation. This makes him a legitimate military target, like anyone else in the direct line of command of Russian military forces on the ground. Russian forces attempted to assassinate Zelensky in the early days of the war. Russia tried to make credible accusations of the assassination attempt. Given these accusations, an attack on Putin would not exactly escalate tensions. But there are serious questions about the wisdom of an assassination attempt on Putin. From a technical standpoint, a long-range drone strike is a pretty high-profile gamble for Ukraine. The drones will need to evade Russian defenses, have pinpoint accuracy, and rely on astonishing luck to have Putin in a predictable place at a predictable time. From a political standpoint, threatening the direct safety of a man who could launch thousands of nuclear weapons probably has downsides. What do we know, and what is happening now? There's a lot we don't know. We do not know whether the attack was carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces, by Ukrainian partisans, or even by Russian dissidents. We don't know if Putin was really targeted. We know that Moscow is now at least conceptually vulnerable to Ukrainian aggression. We also know that Russia will feel the need to respond to this attack. Suppose Ukraine launched this drone, forcing Russia to divert air defense assets away from the front may do less damage. It would have been politically offensive for Putin to allow the Ukrainians to batter Moscow the way Russia beat Kiev. Kiev forces may also be trying to foolishly provoke the Russians into an offensive ahead of the long-awaited attack on Ukraine. We will learn more when the war is over, and what happened is written. So what can happen when Vladimir Putin dies? The Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for more than a year, and the end is not in sight. The Ukrainians are leading a valiant resistance on their land, but the Russian leader does not even think of retreating. As the war drags on, both sides will become more and more desperate. Putin spent months trying to decapitate the Ukrainian leadership in Kiev in 2022. Ukrainians are probably returning the favor. Putin is the embodiment of the old Russian concept of the iron fist, silnaya ruka. This has been a shared belief among Russians since the early days of Russia that their country needed a strong centralized authority, an autocrat, to remain strong and united. Putin plays this role in Russia today. Putin has spent years silencing or collaborating with any alternative powerhouses. Even today, most of the Russian elite is unwilling to oppose Putin, while those around him fear that the Ukrainian war might cost Russia, as they fear that overthrowing him will hasten the collapse of the Russian state. Who will succeed the future Tsar of modern Russia? Frankly, the leadership is not very deep because Putin has spent most of the last decade clearing his regime of any potential rivals. Of course, there are some individuals who could potentially replace Putin. One of the names we frequently hear is former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who advocated for peace with the West and threatened nuclear war. Another name is Putin's senior foreign policy advisor, Nikolai Patrushev, a former KGB officer. There have already been a series of news articles in the Western press predicting that the Russian Federation will break into its constituent pots. In Moscow, they view these stories as a preview of the West's intentions. Another storyline that constantly plays out is regime change in Moscow. The recent drone attack on the Kremlin could be part of that plan. It is believed that peace could be achieved in Ukraine after Putin leaves. Some Westerners even dream that if they can topple Putin, democracy can finally prevail in Russia. Vladimir Putin is losing his hold on the ground annexed by the Russian Empire under Catherine the Great in 1783. Crimea is also of great symbolic importance for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who links Russia's war in Ukraine to his imperial past. Putin described Crimea as a holy land for Russia in many ways. Putin's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 set the stage for the wider invasion war he launched last year, resulting in huge losses for both sides. The struggle to retake Crimea can be extremely fierce. However, Kiev leader Zelensky emphasizes that the war started with Crimea and will end there. For this reason, Ukraine has been carrying out frequent attacks on the Holy Land. The last of these attacks occurred in the port city of Sevastopol. The other day, the oil storage facility with a capacity of 40,000 tons in the city of Sevastopol was hit by unmanned aerial vehicles. A bright explosion turned night into day in Sevastopol, then darkened the sky as a Russian fuel tank burned during the day after a Ukrainian drone strike. The reported kamikaze drone attack set several fuel storage tanks on fire at a large fuel terminal at the western end of Sevastopol. The complex in Kazanka Bay formed a rising cloud of black smoke before it burned, leaving behind charred tanks and pipelines. The attack is the latest in Ukraine's series of operations against Sevastopol, stretching back to last summer's attack on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters using drones and sea vehicles. Moscow's appointed governor of Crimea, Mikhail Razvozhayev, made a statement on his Telegram account stating that 2 drones caused the fire. Preliminary information, however, reported that Ukrainian drones attacked with a drone swarm of at least 10 Chinese-made drones. The TASS news agency reported that the fire covered approximately 21,500 sqft. According to Razvozhayev, there were 60 firefighters trying to control the fire. However, the fire was brought under control about 14 hours after it started. Governor Vasilyev also stated that no one was injured and those living nearby would not be evacuated. He added that the fire will not affect the refueling situation in Sevastopol. Also, video from a drone used to investigate the damage to the facility shows multiple fuel tanks being completely destroyed. In the images, it is observed that some tanks that do not burn themselves have serious thermal damage. The damage appears significant and likely jeopardizes plant operations in the near future. Satellite images show that the facility is close to other Russian infrastructure. Telltale overlays show an air defense or anti-ship missile site to the northeast, just across Kalmykova Bay from the tank depot. In the analyzed satellite images, the coatings of the site appeared blank except for a possible vehicle. If this vehicle is related to air defense, it will be a short-range point defense system. A sizable maneuver and vehicle training area is located to the south, and military bases reportedly along adjacent Kazanka Bay are garrisoning BSF S-800 and 10th Guards Marine Corps Brigade. The brigade took part in the siege of Mariupol and its Azovstal complex and has reportedly suffered heavy losses since the start of the war. Whatever the potential impact on operations, No Russian supply officer would want so much fuel and infrastructure to evaporate. The problem is not the fuel lost but the loss of the ability to conserve large amounts of fuel in the future. Ukraine bought a large fleet of fuel trucks to account for this problem, knowing that installed fuel tanks would be destroyed. So they distributed their fuel to thousands of mobile fuel trucks. Any damage to critical supply stockpiles, such as fuel and ammunition, could pose real threats to Russian defense plans. As concerns over an impending Ukrainian counteroffensive increase, the fuel tank attack would fit the tried and true Ukrainian strategy of preparing the battlefield in advance of such an attack. According to a post from the Crimean Wind Telegram channel, Russia's worry about Crimea may be just the beginning. The post claims that Russia is trying to organize a larger ferry system alongside the Kerch Strait Bridge to support evacuation operations from Crimea to Russia. Russia used the ferries during the bottleneck last fall after several spans of the bridge fell in the Ukrainian attack. However, the post indicates that the ferries will complete traffic on the bridge if Moscow orders an evacuation. On the other hand, the Ukrainian armed forces announced in a statement that the attack on an oil reserve in the Crimea region annexed by Russia is part of the preparations for the upcoming spring counteroffensive. Natalia Humeniuk, head of the Joint Coordination Press Center of the Ukrainian Southern Defense Forces, claimed that the Russian soldiers who were worried about the explosion at the oil storage facility of Sevastopol tried to evacuate their family members. Senior Ukrainian government officials claimed in recent weeks that Russian officials had fled the area ahead of a planned spring counterattack. Natalia Humeniuk claimed that the Russians were headed for bases on the Novosibirsk side. Humeniuk stated that the Russians do not feel peace and sustainable logistic support from Sevastopol. She underlined that the damage to Russia's logistics is one of the elements of preparation of the Ukrainian defense forces for strong operations. Humeniuk added that the Russians felt their resources were being damaged and began to maneuver. So how can Ukraine get Crimea back? The Ukrainian army established a limited presence on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River near Kherson city in the south. While there is no operational progress, the limited passage of Dnipro may push Russian forces to strengthen their defenses at Kherson. Thus, Russia can ease the pressure on other parts of the battlefield, as it may try to protect Crimea. Although the West has collectively provided close to $60 billion in security aid to Ukraine since the start of the war, it has refrained from providing the Ukrainian army with long-range weapons targeting Russian positions and troops in Crimea. However, as the front line approaches Crimea, long-range firing systems such as the M142 high-motion artillery rocket systems and the M27-0 multi-launch rocket system used by the Ukrainian military will finally be able to target Russian positions. Russian forces have previously shown that they are highly vulnerable to precision attacks. The Ukrainian leadership keeps the location of its impending counterattack a secret. The eastern part of Kherson is a likely location as it offers the shortest route to Crimea. In addition, Tamila Tashever, the senior representative of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Black Sea Peninsula, stated in Kiev that Crimea will be liberated and there is no turning back. His comments were built on the growing expectation in Ukraine and around the world that Zelensky would honor his promise last summer and reverse Russia's 9-year illegal annexation of Crimea. Tasheva told the panel that Zelensky had instructed the authorities on how to act immediately after the liberation of Crimea. The Russians are also preparing for the fact that Crimea may soon be at the forefront of the war. Retired U.S. Marine Corps Colonel Mark Cancian, senior advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, pointed to extensive fortifications that have been spotted off the coast of the peninsula and the Russian Sevastopol naval base in recent weeks. Cancian stated that there will not be a single attack that wipes out the Russians. He stated that the offensive will last for a month, and then it will come to an end. The colonel said that at the end of the summer, there will be a rebuilding phase to launch the next defense. He added, "You will see that the dynamic games and attacks gain some territory. Stop, rebuild, attack again." As a result, Russian troops should expect surprises if Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive begins. It's only a matter of time before Ukrainian forces repulse their attempts to capture the Russian city of Bakhmut in the spring and summer, then launch the offensive in the coming months. In the coming weeks, the currently muddy ground is expected to harden in eastern Ukraine, facilitating military offensive operations. We will wait and see what a hot breaking point on the front line will cause for the Russians. Do not forget to follow us and turn on your notifications to be instantly informed about new videos. Thank you for watching.